Okay, Alex. First question is, as you study the Quran and Hadith and Tafsir, what did you find interesting and standing out?
Yeah, so the first thing is the startling differences between the same stories as depicted in the Torah or Tanakh, Old Testament, and as a matter of fact, New Testament as well, compared to the Quranic narrative. Every single story of them will be, they are different. So that's what I find out. The number one, when I started reading the Quran, that was the first thing I noticed, and eventually it came up as a book which I published, and a course which let me show you screen. The course which I give. Let me see. I'll just move it over here. Let's do this. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen. So the course I give usually explain. Here it is. Can you see it good?
Yeah, I see the screen. Yep.
Okay. You can see the master key. That's of course based on comparison between the Quran and the Torah primarily. And then as we talk about, probably it will be second. I have another two courses on global Torah change conspiracy and influence midrash of the Quran. So the number one, if I go for it, okay, let's change the screen. And effective evangelism in reaching out Muslims. And the reason I do mainly Torah, because out of 6,236 verses in the Quran, stories related to the Tanakh, or the Old Testament, they are over 1,000. And stories related to Jesus, in the Quran, there are 25 of them only. So there's a 40 times then Quran speaks more about Old Testament than about Jesus. So that's why I think we have to look into that massive amount of information. So before we go to Jesus, we should deal with Old Testament. That's the point. And I'm gonna show you the first part, and let's see what the Quran speaks about. If the Torah is reliable in the days of Muhammad, here's all the verses we can find when the Quran is proving that the Torah was indeed word of God in the days of Muhammad. So here's the first verse, Surah 2, verse 89. And there comes to them, the Jews, a book from Allah confirming what is with them, meaning the Torah. O children of Israel, believe in what I have sent down, this Quran confirming that which is with you, meaning the Torah. And the last one, but how do they, Jews, come to you, Muhammad, for decision while they have the Torah, in which is the plain decision of Allah? Yet even after that, they turn away, for they are not really believers. So we, as you see, even in 3 verses, we see how the Quran speaks highly about the Torah. But also we have archaeological discoveries, which have been confirming that the Torah never been corrupted over 2,000 years, and I'm primarily speaking about Dead Sea Scrolls, which some of the biblical Dead Sea Scrolls are almost 1,000 years older than next known Hebrew Bible, and the copies of Genesis, some of Dead Sea Scrolls are extremely similar to the traditional Hebrew text, meaning all the stories from Adam to Moses in the Torah are exactly the same in any Bible and anywhere in the planet in any languages. So here's a simple comparison between Dead Sea Scrolls, Masoretic text, and today's Torah. They're all exactly the same in the storytelling line. Well, the New Testament and the Quran were in between two manuscripts who have been found. So it's proving that all Torahs being unchanged anywhere from 125 BC until today. And also we have non-Hebrew versions of the Old Testament. There's a Greek Septuagint, then we have Syriac Peshitta, and we have Latin Vulgate. So we have three different languages. And if we translate back to English, they will be identical to Torah of Old Testament, sorry, to the Masoretic text or to the Dead Sea Scrolls. With all small differences, they are not affecting the storylines at all. So therefore, I'm going to the second part, and usually when I ask about the Quran, do the Quran and the Torah came from the same God? I usually bring a couple of.
I have a question about the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yeah,
Are they written in 125 BC or they are buried in 105 BC?
no, they are written in 125, or let's say it's 200 BC to 70 AD. They've been buried in 70 AD when the Romans finally destroyed Masada. And it was before that because the Qumran was in an area of Dead Sea. So that's why we call Dead Sea Scrolls. So they've been buried by 70 AD, but they were written prior to that. And copies of Genesis, primarily, they've been dated 125 years BC, before Christ. So at least 100 years before Christ, those pages were written and survived in the climate. So and they in a display in the museums, and as well as we have a book which is using all survived documents from all Dead Sea Scrolls and compared with Masoretic text, and we see what was missing. Some words were changed, but meaning and the storyline had never been changed whatsoever. That's why I said basically that the Torah of Dead Sea Scrolls and in the Septuagint and Masoretic text, which is most of our Bibles are using for Old Testament, are exactly the same. There is no change in story of Adam, story of Joseph, or story of Moses for that reason.
Then you have a reliable text, like almost like 800 years before Muhammad. You have a Torah, and the storyline is same our days Torah.
Exactly.
Correct?
Yeah, and
so you have like about like 125 BC. It means 700 years before, more than 700 before Muhammad. We have that Torah that we can see some stories, and like in our days stories like they are matching. This is what we are saying, right?
Yeah, exactly. So and the beauty of it, everybody now who wants to check it out can go online and find translation from Hebrew or Greek, which is Septuagint, into the English and compare them. So there is a great way to compare today's Bible in English and Old Testament. And also we can compare Greek Septuagint, which is about 200 AD to roughly 400 AD, the manuscripts, and Dead Sea Scroll, which is 100 BC. So all of them were put side by side, all translated into English, and we could say anybody who wants to find out if what we're speaking today is true, they could just look at it, and within 10 minutes they will find out if I'm saying correct way or not. Did I answer the question?
Yep, thank you.
So the first question usually I use in that regard is, do the Quran and the Torah come from the same God? And I'm gonna use two passages, which is one from a Torah about Joseph and another from David and Saul story of the Tanakh, which is not the Torah technically, but the Quran speaks about it. So I'm just want to do a brief introduction into that story of Joseph. The first part, there are two parts of the story of Joseph. I'll break it down. So number one, the jealousy of Joseph's brothers and plot to kill Joseph. So we see in the Torah section and the Quran on the left and the right side. So here we see, I want just to go to the comparison right away, but you can see which verses I used in both cases. So in the Quran, it said the brothers took Joseph from Jacob's tent in the morning and returned to the father without returned to their father without him in the evening the same day. They claimed to play games as Joseph was washing their clothes. In the Torah, it's quite different. In the brothers went to Shechem to feed their father's flock. After a few weeks, father sent Joseph to check on his sons. Joseph walked almost 150 kilometers in probably 2-3 days or more before he met with brothers. After selling Joseph, they traveled back to Hebron within the next 2-3 days or even probably week with the ship, right? So here's we see differences on the map. So that according to the Quran, entire story of taking Joseph from father's land and selling him to travelers and coming back to father, it happened within one day. In the morning, they took Joseph and came back in the evening without Joseph. So the story in the Quran happened in one location in one day. Let's say 12 hours, not even 24 hours. But according to the Torah, the entire story happened in two different locations and about 150 kilometers apart and within at least 1 week. So probably its father hadn't seen Joseph for maybe 2 weeks before when he sent Joseph away from Hebron to the moment of our brothers came back to father without Joseph. And they didn't tell they find Joseph being killed or something. So they just said they find the shirt on the way. So that took them probably more than 1 week travel. So that how you see how different you can see how different narrative of the Quran is against Torah. And as a matter of fact, you can see all the Torah story in all this is called Septuagint and Masoretic text is exactly the same. It's only one book, which is Quran, tells story completely different. But we can go to the second part. As brothers coming in the Quran to father, they're crying and they said that father, you will not believe us, but Joseph was killed by the wolf, and father said, I don't believe you. In the Torah is opposite. They coming to the father, they show him the shirt of. They said it's Joseph's shirt or not, we don't know. Basically saying we never met Joseph. That's the idea. And when Jacob looked at this or the shirt, he recognized it, and he said that the fierce animal has devoured him, and that Joseph is without doubt rent in pieces. And then Jacob started crying, and it said he mourned for his son many days. So as we see in comparison, what the Quran said, his brothers told their father that Joseph was dead, and his father accused the brothers of lying. And the brothers were crying about Joseph's demise, but not their father. According to the Torah, it's opposite. The brothers didn't tell their father why Joseph was killed. Jacob concluded it in his own accord, and it was Joseph's father had cried over his death, but not brothers. So as you see, it's totally opposite story. And I understand it like this impossible to story happen both ways. It happened only one way. It's either how the Torah shows us or how the Quran shows, right? So it cannot be. So idea is it cannot be from the same source. But they're going to reinforce that issue as we go forward to the same story as it depicted in the both books, in the Torah and the Quran. But the end of the journey of Joseph, when Joseph actually revealed himself to his brothers as being ruler of Egypt. So in the Quran it said that the father, before even seeing Joseph, getting information from Joseph being alive, he said, I smell Joseph. So I smell that Joseph is alive. And everybody around him in Canaan, according to the Quran, said, you are in old age, you are in your old error, because you always maintain that Joseph was alive, but he's not. But when finally the bearer of glad tidings arrived, and he told those story, Jacob said, did I not say to you over 20 years ago, I know from Allah which you don't know. So basically, it's here in the Quran, Jacob said that I knew that Joseph was not killed. I always knew Joseph was alive. Okay, and here's the proof now. Well, if you read the Torah, the same ending, when the brothers came and told their father Jacob that Joseph is alive and he's ruler over all the land of Egypt, it said his heart became numb, for he did not believe them. And they told him all the words of Joseph, which he has said to them. And then he saw the wagons that Joseph has sent to carry him. The spirit of their father Jacob revived, and Israel said, "It's enough. Joseph, my son, is yet alive. I'll go and see him before I die." So as we see in a Torah, it's completely different from the Quranic perspective. In the Torah, when brothers told Jacob that Joseph was alive, he didn't believe them. And it took them time to convince him, because idea is Joseph always believed in his heart for 22 years that Joseph was dead. In the Quran, it's opposite. Joseph is alive according to the Quran in minds of Jacob, because he's a prophet of Allah. So Allah will never keep them in the dark. That's the idea of the Quranic narrative. And later on, we're going to see where the Quran get this information from originally. So as we see that it's totally incompatible, the story of the same situation when it's as depicted in the Quran and in the Torah. They cannot be from the same author. It's impossibility. As a matter of fact, I just show you one small story. I'm going to show you another one. But if you read every story start from Adam and go to all the way to the Old Testament stories of the Tanakh and David and Solomon, every single story is different. My favorite story of Job in the Quran, it takes only 4 verses in the Quran to describe the story of Job, which is in the Bible, entire book of the Old Testament. It's about the story of Job. And yet, in 4 verses out of the Quran, managed to make 3 mistakes. 75% of the storyline in the Quran is wrong. Well, there is, for example, as we just saw the story of Joseph and Jacob in the Quran. I counted, there are 98 verses in Surah 12 about Joseph, and there are 174 differences. So almost 2 differences per verse. I think it's way too much. Well, now I'm going to show you my favorite story of David and Goliath. And here we're going to break in 2 parts again. The story of Saul and David. So about King Saul, here's what the Quran said about King Saul, generally speaking, that in verse 248 of Surah 2, it said, the sign of his kingdom, of Saul's kingdom, is that there shall come to you a wooden box where there is Shekinah, peace and reassurance from your Lord, and the remnant of which Musa or Moses and Aaron left behind, carried by the angels. Verily, in this is a sign for you if you are indeed believers. So here's what happened. The prophet Samuel telling Israelites, saying, listen, God decided to make Saul as your king. And his assurance that it's command from God. The wooden box, which is Ark of the Covenant of Moses, will come to you carried by angels. So that story we find in the book of 1 Samuel, when it said the Philistines fought with Israelites and Israel was defeated, and the Ark of God was captured. And several months later, Ark of the Ark of the Lord was in the country of Philistines 7 months. And eventually they decided to get rid of it because there was so much trouble they had. So they put Ark on the cart, and the cows went straight, carrying this Ark, to the direction of Beth Shemesh along the highway. It said, and cart came into the field of Joshua of Beth Shemesh and stopped there. So Beth Shemesh was in the position of Israelites. So 7 months after Ark was captured, it been returned. So here's a small problem. According to the Quran, the sign of sole kingship was the return of the Ark. According to the Tanakh, the Ark was captured and returned in 1094 BC. The soul became a king in 1052 BC. So the Ark was in Israel already for 42 years before, already, and could not be the sign of Saul's kingship. As the Quran saying, it was returned during the King Saul reign in the beginning. Well, according to the Tanakh, it was already in the possession of Israelites for 42 years. So it cannot be, return of the Ark cannot be the sign of King Saul kingship. It's a possibility. But here's a second story when David and Goliath, that's famous one, right? So, whoops. So in Surah 2:149, when Saul set out with the army, he said, "Verily Allah will try you by the river. So whoever drinks thereof, he is not of me. And whoever tasted it not, he is of me, except him who takes thereof in the hollow of his hand. Yet they drank thereof all except the few of them." So then he crossed the river, and he and those who believe with him, they, unbelievers, say, "We have no power to against Goliath and his forces." And go back, well, let's go to the verse 251. So they routed them, Philistines, by Allah's leave, and they killed Goliath. So here's that interesting story, which we have, in order to compare it with the same story of the Old Testament, we have to go to the book of Judges, different book, chapter 7. When Lord God said unto Gideon, "The people are too many in the army, so bring them down to the river." And it said, everyone who was drinking water a certain way with his tongue, you should set by himself. Likewise, everyone who bowed down and upon his knees to drink. So there are two different two different styles of people drank the water. Ones who was like completely bowing down and drinking from the river, the majority of them, and some of them who were just using the hand to drink. And God said after that, "By these 300 men who lapped will I save you and deliver the Midianites into thy hand." So here's simple comparison. According to the Quran, Saul gathered Israelites against Philistines. And according to the Bible, it was Gideon who gathered Israelites against Midianites. Then, according to the Quran, Saul brought an army of Israelites to river to test their faith, who were faithful or not. That Quran said. According to the Bible, it was Gideon who brought an army to the river in order to reduce the size from 10,000 to 300. And in the Quran, only people who did not drink water were believers, but the entire army crossed the river for battle. According to the Bible, those who lapped water crossed the river and fought the battle. The rest went home. And the last difference, according to the Quran, believers wanted to fight enemy. Others who drank from a river were afraid, and David went out and killed Goliath. Well, the story of David killing Goliath between Philistines and Israelites happened 166 years after the event when Saul fought against Philistines and David killed Goliath. So as we see in the Quran, in the map, let's look at the map. So the entire story of Saul's army bringing to the river, crossing the river, facing Goliath and his army, and David killing Goliath happened in presumably one day or in 2 days' time, and in one location, and the one leader. But according to the Tanakh, it was Gideon who was fighting Midianites up north, and it was Saul who was fighting Philistines on the south. They are two different locations, they are two different leaders, and 166 years apart. Well, we see how the Quran mixing up two different stories. As a matter of fact, three different stories in three different timelines. Ark of the Covenant returned to Israelites 42 years before Saul became a king. In the Quran, it's happened in one day. Then,
Alex, sorry for interrupting, okay, but what do like Muslims when you explain them this way? All these differences, all this like time and the events and everything is different, so not matching. What they say when you explain them?
let me show you what they say. I stopped it. So let me. They say usually that, oh, you know what? The Quran has precedent over the Torah. Quran is higher for Muslims. And therefore, if the Quran and the Torah disagreeing, we take the Quran as the truth. And then we can just condemn the Torah to be not reliable. But that's the Quran's make a claim about itself being guardian over the Torah. But unfortunately for Muslims, in that case, ask them, so do you think all these stories been corrupted by the Jews? Oh, yes. Can you prove it from your own sources, like Quran? Did Quran say that the stories were corrupted by the Jews? Did Muhammad said it? Did his companions said it? Or Tafsir even said it? And here I'm going to show you the second part of the video, of the PowerPoint I usually show, which is so it is what I call it global Torah change conspiracy. Can you see?
Yes, I can see it.
So, and I'm gonna just show a few things because it's quite long. And I believe that this is the most devastating argument for any Muslim anywhere in the world at any time. Here's what we have. As I previously mentioned, usually people say the Quran is trustworthy over the books that preceded it. Therefore, whatever in those previous books confirms the Quran, confirms to the Quran is true, and whatever disagrees with the Quran is false. So that's basic idea of modern day Muslims who say that, but unfortunately, they try to use source against criticism of the Torah from non-Muslim, non-Christian, or liberal Christian sources or atheist sources of modern days primarily. But I insist for the Muslims to take the source of the criticism of the Torah or the Tanakh should be only three things: Quran, Hadith, and Tafsir. So therefore, I'm going to introduce you that one of the article written by fellow Muslim. His name is Bassam Zawari. You can see his face here. When he said evidence that Islam teaches that there was textual corruption of the Christian and Jewish scriptures. Well, I will disagree with him on the word evidence because it's not the evidence in my opinion. As he also pointed out here in his article, that's evidence from the Quran, etc. I think that's not evidence, they are claims. And I'm going to show you a few claims from the Quran, which I added to his article, so to speak. For example, in the Quran, Surah 146, it said, those to whom we gave the scripture, Jews and Christians, recognize him, Muhammad, as they recognize their son. So idea is, it's in the Bible, people who has the Torah, they could find Prophet Muhammad in the Torah in very very vivid details. Okay, here's another one. 26, Surah 26, 196. And verily it the Quran in the relation to Prophet Muhammad is unknown in the scripture, the Torah and Injil of former people. The word, two words, former people, is important for the third part. But here again, it's said the Quran and Muhammad was announced in the Torah. That's the idea of the Quran. That's a claim Quran made. And the last one, those who follow messenger, the prophet, who can neither read nor write, who is Muhammad according to the Quran, whom they find written with them in the Torah. Find written with them in the Torah. So the Jews in Medina, they have a Torah and they find Muhammad in it. So question, what the Jews in the 7th century AD, 700 years after Dead Sea Scrolls were written and hidden, find in the Torah according to the Quran. And according to what I just read to you, it should be in the name of Muhammad and his detailed description. So let me just go to that article, and I'm going to show several screenshots. For example, he said, and the prophet pulled the man and asked, "Don't you find me in the Torah and Gospel?" The man replied back and said, "We find someone who is similar to you and your Ummah and from the place you've been brought up, and we were hoping that you would be from amongst us. When you rose up as a prophet, we were afraid that it would be you. However, we looked and saw that it was not you." The prophet replied back and asking, "Why is that?" The man said, "From him will be 70,000 of his followers from his community who will have no judgment passed on them, no punishment. But you have a simple number of men following you." The prophet replied back, "By he whose hand my soul lies, it is me, and it's referring to my community. And there are more than 70,000, 70,000, and 70,000. So I want to show you what Bassam Zawadi wrote in a note. Note how the man informed the prophet that one of the signs of the prophet to come, according to the Torah or Gospel, is that the prophet will have 70,000 followers who will enter paradise with no judgment passed on them. Where do we see this in today's Torah or Gospel? Nowhere, thus indicating that it has been removed from the text, which in turn imply textual corruption. Again, what did Jews in the 7th century find in the Torah according to the Muhammad? The name of Muhammad and his detailed description. Let's move on. Kabul Akbar said, the first line of the Torah, which is Genesis 1:1, says, "Muhammad is the messenger of Allah and is my chosen slave. Verily, he is neither rude nor harsh, and he is a man who would not yell or scream in markets, and he will never award an ill deed with an ill deed. On the contrary, he will always award ill deeds with forgiveness. His birth will take place in Mecca, and his migration will be to Taiba, and his dominion will be Sham." That, according to this Jewish guy, Jewish rabbi, who converted to Islam, and who died 1400 years after Hijrah, or migration of Muhammad from Mecca to Medina, he claimed that in his possession was the Torah, but the first line of the Torah, which is Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, is talking about Muhammad being messenger of Allah. And then he continues. He said the second line of the Torah, which is Genesis 1:2, says Muhammad is a messenger of Allah. His nation are constantly praising. They praise Allah for whatever occurs to them, that it's good or bad. They praise and thank Allah for every situation and glorify Allah while they stand on a place that is higher than floor. They are people who always watch the sun to know prayer times and pray each prayer on its time, even if they were in a filthy place. They wear izar and they wrap around their waist, and they wash and cleanse their parts at night, and their voices during the time of night are like that of bees, referring to their prayers. This chunk of what I just read to you, it's according to this God, is the second verse of Genesis 1. And it's interesting how we can read from what Bassam Zawadi said about it. Here we see that Ka'b ibn al-Akbar is giving description of Prophet Muhammad from the Torah that we cannot find in today's Bible. Amen to that. We couldn't find that stuff in our Bible. Some might argue that this narration is alluding to Isaiah 43. However, if one compares the narration with the passage in Isaiah, he would see that many traits are missing. Cobb mentions that the prophet's community will know how to pray by looking at the sun, yet this is not found in the Bible. Again, I can say only amen to that. We couldn't find that in the Bible. But let's move on a few more passages here. Again, Ka'b ibn al-Ahbar, who stated in one narration that God said in the Torah, quote, O Muhammad, I am revealing to you a new Torah, with which you will open the eyes of the blind, ears of the deaf, and sealed heart. End quote. So that's quotes should be found in the days of Muhammad, in the hands of a rabbi, in the Torah in Hebrew, in Medina or Yathrib. Here's another one. Ibn Abbas asked Ka'b, how do you find the description of prophet in the Torah? And Ka'b al-Akbar said, we find him as Muhammad ibn Abdullah. He's born in Mecca and he will immigrate to Taiba and his kingdom will be Sham. So, my question, what did Jews in 7th century find in the Torah according to the rabbi from Medina? And it's a very simple answer. The name of Muhammad and his detailed description. So as we see now, I just showed you a few examples here. As we see here that the Muslims say, Muslim sources speak about corruption of the Torah. And they say nothing about story of Joseph being corrupted, not about story of Saul being corrupted, story of Gideon was added to the Tanakh. No, they've been talking about the corruption happened in the days of Muhammad. When the Jews met him, they look at the Torah, they find his description in the Genesis 1, verse 1 and verse 2. And they decided to corrupt the Torah and attributed the Genesis chapter 1, not to the Muhammad and his community, not the way he was screaming and yelling in the market, or he was like quiet man, or how his communities are washing their private parts before they pray. But they decided to corrupt the Torah by changing this narrative from Muhammad and his community into the story of creation of the world. That's idea what I understand from.
How many followers he has for that group?
Who?
From this, the group like this follow for Torah, Jewish people that time. What is there any percentage, like how many of them start following Muhammad, or is there any known followers that really has background with Jewish that who know who can state that they don't you said in our Torah this man is described well, so why don't you follow him or something like that?
Well,
does make any sense question?
The claim is basically that the Jews in Medina, at least in Medina, which they have 3 tribes, and each one of them has, let's say, 1,000 each of the men and number of new women and children and elders. We talk about maybe 7,000-8,000 plus the Jews of Hebar. They should have the same Torah, because I also read how Muhammad was writing the letter to the Jews in Hebar, which is like a little bit north from Medina, saying to them that you will find me written in your Torah. So assumption is the Jews in Medina and Hebar has a Torah with the name of Muhammad in it. And only after they saw Muhammad, they decided to remove the name of Muhammad from the Torah. That's what we find in the sources in the Quran, and what the Muhammad said in the Hadith, and also the rabbis, supposedly, allegedly, rabbi who converted to Islam, he said it. The early sources, the main sources of the Quran, of Islam, is speaking about that the Jews did indeed corrupt the Torah, as modern day Muslims say. But they didn't say what modern day Muslims say. They said the Jews corrupted Torah by removing the name of Muhammad and his description from the Torah. When you talk to a Muslim today, and especially apologists, they never mention that. Always say, oh, that was the story of Adam was changed, story of Joseph was changed, story of Moses was changed, whatever, story of Jesus was changed, right? But they never go to their own sources. So I said, why don't you go to sources? Because if you're Muslim, you're not atheist, you're not liberal Christian who follow the Bart Ehrman, for example, or agnostic. Sorry, why are you using arguments from modern day sources? Why don't you trust your own sources? Well, the Quran said. Quran said you find Muhammad in your own Torah. Let's find it. The beauty of it is, like we have, as you said, 700 years prior to the birth of Muhammad, we have Dead Sea Scrolls who survived for 700 years prior to Muhammad until our days, for over 2,000 years. And we could look at their pages and we couldn't find the description of Muhammad there. So it seems.
Okay, then
Yeah.
Hold on. I have a question. Then the claim is this: after after the 6th century, the corruption took place, right?
Yeah, that's what they say.
Because then before that, whatever we have, it might okay. So the Torah that was written, copied after 6th century, let me say that, like after Muhammad, is not okay, but all the Torahs are before that okay.
Yeah, that must
So
be.
we have a kind of line that because when they saw that there is a name of Muhammad in their Torah and detailed description, everything, then they change it.
Yeah. So that's the idea we get from their own sources, including the Quran. But as I mentioned, today's Muslims, they shy away from that argument because they are educated. They're not like Ibn Abbas. They're not like other companions of Muhammad. They're not like Ka'b al-Akbar, who lived 1400 years ago. They live in 21st century, and they know that we have foundation, we have proof that the Torah has never been changed from 700 years before Muhammad to today's time, right? So therefore, they try to avoid the argument because the argument will fall into the face flat, as soon as we start reading the source. As we see, the source of the Quran and Hadith are not reliable and they're anecdotal in that sense. Because for sure, we don't have name of Muhammad written with that description as Ka'b said, allegedly, instead of Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 and 2. It's laughable to even suggest that Muhammad, like God put the Muhammad's and his description and his description of his community in the first beginning of the Torah and pushed away the story of creation further down. So that doesn't make sense.
Then how do they explain this?
They cannot explain that.
How do they explain that, archaeologically, all this proven, it is science, right? It is like things that found, like as you mentioned, Dead Scrolls and others. How do they explain this, that text or part of the text or something that there is nothing mentioned about Muhammad? So how do they explain this?
So far, I didn't hear any logical explanation because, let's say, as I try to walk with them in a court of reason and logic and ask them, well, whatever you said against the Jews, you have to prove to me, right? So I'm not talking about New Testament yet. I'm talking about the simple Torah, which is not Christian book per se. It's a Jewish book, okay? So you blame Jews in front of me. Why don't you own the argument and prove me from using sources like we have, archaeological sources, ancient manuscripts, which predates Muhammad? Why don't you find the Torah, which is written before Muhammad was born, in Hebrew, where we find this the name of Muhammad in the same detail as Kaaba Akbar mentioned, the same detail like maybe Quran is mentioned. And we're going to see not only that, but we'll see the story of Joseph as we just look and find out that the story of Joseph in Quran is incompatible with the story of Joseph in the Torah. But I want to find the Torah in Hebrew, which predates Muhammad, when the story of Joseph are written exactly as it's in the Quran. And then we can sit and reason together and see why we have two different Torahs and why Quran is confirming one Torah, but another Torah is totally different. But as I'm learning so far, they have no argument. They never even looked for that, the old ancient manuscript of the Torah, which could support the Quran, which could support that what the Quran claims is somewhat reliable. So they have nothing. For 1400 years, Islam has this built upon the empty claims. It's like you build a house, there is no foundation whatsoever. You build on the sand. And as soon as I start asking questions, Muslims, they don't know how to answer because they never thought about it and they never look into it. So they have simple blind faith and they just keep repeating, oh, my Quran is better than your Torah been corrupted because Qurans are different than story than the Torah. But when I ask them, where did you find it? And what was changed in the Torah? According to your own sources. And then I show them their sources. They're complete shock because they never thought about it. So here's the basically end of the claim of Islam. So before any Muslim will build new mosques, they print new Quran, will go to the dawah on the streets and try to convince Christians or non-Christians that Islam is true religion, all that they need to do, the step number one, they should find the Torah in Hebrew, which predates birth of Muhammad, written written in Hebrew, predates birth of Muhammad. And when we have name of Muhammad and his description written clearly, not vaguely, and the stories of, for example, Joseph and Jacob, they're written exactly as in the Quran. Until that, they have no arguments whatsoever, and there's no reason for us to even to answer their question until they answer
Okay,
our
then
question.
if they have any argument, anything, okay, so where did they get it? Where they get all these stories?
Yeah, that's a good question.
What it is, like product of imagination, or what is the, how a person can be like, all stories, we have like many stories there, right?
Yeah.
How every single stories you tell a different, what is the source?
Okay. Um, it's almost 20 years since I started reading the Quran first time. And as you said, that question bothered me for a long time until this year, because I don't understand where this different story came from. And it's kind of logical when you read the Quran story of Joseph from the beginning to the end. It's kind of logical. But I puzzled with the source of it. Why it has a logical source. So I'm gonna show you what I start reading this year and how it's affect my knowledge now. Would make me make a what it called. I could make a claim which could be supported. So I start reading the Jewish sources, which is what they call it midrash, because we have a Talmud which is explaining basically what was what to do during Sabbath, how to walk, how to wash yourself, how to perform circumcision, whatever. But the most interesting part, I'm going to share you the screen, which is my part 3 of my presentation here. Give me a second, I will just move it on. Midrash is basically explanation and addition to the Torah. I'm still reading it, and here I'm going to share with you several interesting passages. So here's what we have in the Quran's claim, right? And indeed, the Quran is a revelation of the Lord of the worlds, and indeed, it is mentioned in the scriptures of former peoples. In chapter 25, Surah 25, verse 4 and 5 said, and those who disbelieve say, this Quran is not except a falsehood he, Muhammad, invented, and another people assisted him in it. And they say legends of the former peoples, which he has written down, as they dictated to him morning and afternoon. So this here we find in the Quran written, and I believe wholeheartedly, and I can prove it now, that these Arabs who did not believe in Muhammad's message, they say that it's you create the Quran and they have other people who help you with it. And legends of the former peoples, they are Jews, which you, Muhammad, caused to write it down, or you wrote down by yourself, and they dictate to him morning and afternoon. They basically said, we know who are coming to Muhammad, to you, Muhammad, these Jews who are coming and teaching you and telling you all the stories. And we know that legends of the Jews, and they keep saying it to you. So you come back later on in the evening and you recite Quran and you said it's from God. No, it's not from God. It's from these people. That's a claim in the Quran recorded. And I believe it's exactly what happened. Here's what I show you. Here's we have Quran, Midrash, and the Torah side by side. I'm going to show you a few examples. In the topic, general topic, it said Jacob tried to protect Joseph from his brother's envy. Okay. In the Quran, it said, he, the father, said to Joseph, O my son, relate not your vision to your brothers, lest they should arrange a plot against you. So he tried to protect his son against the envy of his brothers. In the Midrash, it said, slightly different, but the same idea. Jacob may be excused because he said something harshly to Joseph in front of the brothers. He had spoken in this way only in order to avert the envy and hate of his brethren from Joseph. As you see, the idea on the Quran came from Midrash. And I want to tell you something. Midrash is being composed and eventually compiled within 400 AD to 1200 AD. For this, 800 years, stories of Midrash being brought in, and eventually they put it in the books. And Louis Ginsberg in 1909 and 1910 published the book by the name Legends of the Jews, and he put all the stories together, give sources where the story came from, because we have a Targum, we have Hadakah, we have who knows what. There's tons of Jewish sources. He put them in one book, and basically the idea is we could see now what Jews at that time believed and how the Quran borrowed ideas from the Jews. Because the Quran said the Jews came and taught Muhammad. Now, the interesting thing is they were teaching not the Torah, but the legends of the Jews, meaning the Midrash, the stories, fairy tales, night tales, children, like what called Bible school, with the kids in a Sunday school class, kind of like that, Sabbath school class, the Jews. So, and as we go there, we're going to see, for example, in the story of second part here on the same screen, Jacob was sure that Joseph was alive, and it's said here. So let me go back. I cannot bring the. Here it is. They say, "Oh, Father, we went over racing with one another and left Joseph by our belongings, and the wolf ate him, but you will not believe us." And he said, your souls entice you to do something, but patience is beautiful, and God is my help against what you described. Here we see how Jacob refused to believe that Joseph was dead. Okay, so if you look at the Midrash, it's a little bit different, but the same idea. In the law of nature was, however, much one may grieve over the death of a dear one at the end of the year, consolation find its way to the heart of the mourner. But the disappearance of a living man can never be wiped out of one's memory. Therefore, the fact that he was inconsolable made Jacob suspect that Joseph was alive, and he did not grieve interceding to the reports of his sons. You see how Midrash saying that Jacob stopped believing in the story of his brothers, not right away, as the Quran said, but later on, start suspecting that Joseph was alive. As we go on forward to the story of Midrash about Joseph and Jacob, we find how he was hoping that his brothers find Joseph in Egypt. Well, it's completely different from the Torah when it's said that he said in the red here, and the first animal is devouring, Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces, and Jacob torn his garment and put sackcloth upon his loins, and mourned for his son many days. And until the end of the story, 22 years later, he still believed that Joseph was killed by the animal 22 years ago. But Midrash tells a different story. Quran borrowed the idea of Jacob had suspicions of Joseph being not killed, but put it a little bit further and explained and tells the story that Jacob denied a report of his brother, of his son right away. When Midrash, he denied report later on. Okay, so here's a story. Here's a few more things. I'm gonna show you another one. For example, in the Quran, we read that short of Joseph was torn by wife of Potiphar, or Aziz, wife of Aziz. He's in the Quran. It said here, as they raced towards the door, she tore his shirt from behind. Okay, so of course we couldn't find that in the Bible, because it said, but he left his garment is her hand. There is no way you find in the Torah that it was torn garment until you reach the Midrash story. And here we see on the bottom section, also she took Joseph's torn garment and laid it out next to her. So as we see, Midrash not only contradicts the Torah, but also inspires the Quran. Of course, the Quran never gives exact story of the Midrash, but he tells stories somewhat closely, and I should say the Quran is more resembles the Midrash, but not the Torah, because I believe the Jews who came to Muhammad in Medina or maybe in Mecca, they were teaching him the stories, what they believe are written in the Torah, but they have idea of Midrash in their heads. So they were teaching him Midrashim stories, and they are like colorful. Let's say if the story of Joseph and wife of Potiphar, like about maybe 4 or 5 verses in the Bible, it's 13 pages written in the Midrash, very detailed. So that's kind of story which good for the midnight story, but it's totally different from the Torah, and the Quran borrows from some parts of it, because Quran is shorter than the Torah. Quran is way shorter than Midrash, but Midrash gives a lot of details. Quran borrows some of them, as we see, and one of my favorite one here, in the Quran it said, some ladies in the city said the governor's wife is trying to seduce her servant. She is deeply in love with him. We see she has gone astray. And when she heard of the gossip, she invited them and prepared for them a banquet, and she gave each one of them a knife. She said, "Come out before them," talking about Joseph. And then they saw him. They marveled at him and cut their hands. They said, "Good God, it is not a human, just must be a precious angel." Of course, there is nothing in the Torah about it. But if we're going to read the Midrash, we find exactly the same story. It's here in the Midrash. She commanded her maidservant to prepare food for all women, and she spread a banquet before them in their house. She placed knives upon the table to peel the oranges, and she ordered Joseph to appear, arrayed costly garments, and wait upon her guest. When Joseph came in, the woman could not take their eyes off him, and they all cut their hands with the knives, and the oranges in their hands were covered with blood. As we see, it's perfectly matching story of Midrash, but we have no zero about this story in the Torah. Torah is free from this stuff, but it's fully embedded in Midrash, and it's part of the story because it's so interesting and colorful. Was brought into the attention of Muhammad, and he recorded this as his. He thought it's actually in the Torah. That's why Quran said, after the Quran said, "I sent the Quran to confirm the Torah." Well, actually, the proper word should be, instead of Torah, should be put Midrash. So the out of the Quran confirm Midrash, not the Torah. But Muhammad, who is out of the Quran in that case, has no idea, because he couldn't read or write. He couldn't check on what these Jews were talking to him. Is it actually written in the Torah? Or they just telling him the Midrashim story, which are indeed in itself are contradicted to the Torah in many ways. They have a lot of anachronisms. They are making, they whitewashing prophets' actions and patriarchs' actions as well. So the Midrash is full of problems compared to the Torah. But Muhammad has no idea. So he just said, you know what? I'm going to use it probably because the Jews, I trust the Jews, they are people who know stuff. Unfortunately for him, he didn't know. So here's another one. The last one I'm going to show you. In the Quran, it said, Jacob said, "O my sons, do not enter by one gate, but enter by different gates as you go to go to Egypt." So that's the idea. Of course, there's nothing in the Torah about it, but we have story of Midrash. And as he knew that they were likely to attract attention on account of their heroic stature and handsome appearance, he cautioned them against going to the city altogether through the same gate, or indeed showing themselves altogether anywhere in public, that the evil eye be not cast upon them. So as you see in the Midrash, we have bigger picture, make reason why Jacob tell their sons not to go through the same gate. Well, because he said, "You're so handsome that people will cast an evil eye on you." So that's reason. But if you read the Quran, it's very different. It said, "Oh, my sons, don't enter by one gate, but enter by different gate. I cannot avail you anything against God. The decision rests only with God. On him I rely, and on him let the reliant rely." It doesn't make any sense. Like, why in the Quran he cautioned them not to go to the same gate? There is no reason for them to go out of just, out of the blue. Just he said it. In the Midrash, he explained why. No evil eye will be cast on you. So it makes sense. Midrash story makes sense. And it's bigger, it's larger. And the Quran is shorter and doesn't tell entire story. Why is that? And of course, it's completely missing in the Torah of this stuff. So as you see now, basic idea is I have of course more to it, but as you probably get the idea is that I believe wholeheartedly, and I could prove it with all these examples, that these Jews were coming to Muhammad, telling them stories from Midrash. He recorded in the Quran, and now we still have this book full of these stories, colorful some of them interesting, some out of blue, you don't know where it came from. but they are relying on the Quran, on the Midrashim story, on the telling, and we could basically say that the Quran has no heavenly origin but earthly, and we know these people who are coming to Muhammad teaching them, and that's what we know. Now we find all the verses from a Midrash which been embedded in the Quran, so we have full argument could be having full support to prove the point that the Quran is indeed copy of Midrash and cannot be from God, and therefore they're not the Quran is not reliable source of information, and Islam based on the Quran, which in turn is not reliable, this cannot be Abrahamic religion. That's period. Any questions?
How today, nowadays, Jewish or in the history, do they respect the Midrash? Do they receive it an authority?
I asked several Jews, including rabbis, and to my dismay, they try to avoid answering directly. But I asked a few questions, very direct, small parts, not just saying whether you believe in Midrash is reliable or not, but even selected parts, like going through the same gate, for example, repeating origins. People who I asked, they didn't really give me the definite answer, but I find other stories which I didn't mention here, and some of them are not in the Quran, that's why they're not related. But I find in the websites, modern day website of the Jewish organization, and I could see how they're praising the story written in Midrash as a reliable source. So I'm not sure how much of the Midrash is modern day Jews will accept, but I presume that modern day rabbinical Judaism does not based on the Torah, they based on Talmud and Midrash. And if you read the full Midrash, we see how many problems do we have. I want to give you one story only. There is a problem in Masoretic text about genealogy of Shem, from Shem to Abraham. It's seemingly, if you add all this, people who've been born and died before Abraham, you see how Shem outlived and Peleg outlived many of them, and they lived during the time of Abraham. In Midrash, it's basically said that the Shem was no one else but Melchizedek, whom Abraham brought tithes and offering after he defeated kings who attacked Sodom. And by doing that, they say, well, Christ could not be type of Melchizedek, because in the New Testament it said, we don't know who his mother was of Melchizedek, who was father, and without mother, without father, we don't know his origin. And that's how Christ is, the type of Melchizedek. So the Jews using that genealogy saying, oh, well, and it's written very descriptive in Midrash. The Melchizedek was Shem, because Shem lived during the time of Abraham. But if you look, unfortunately, Dead Sea Scrolls, the chapter 11 of Genesis, didn't survive. So we can look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, but we have Septuagint, which predates birth of Muhammad by a few hundred years, and the timeline of from Shem and Peleg to Abraham, they're quite different. They're longer time, and every time you see how father died before the death of his son, like normal, right? So the father dying, and then son give birth, and he dies, and his son lives, and so on, right? So Shem, according to Septuagint, Shem could not live in it. He died 500 years before Abraham. Therefore, he could not be Melchizedek, because he was dead for 500 years. By Midrash, it's explicitly said that Shem is Melchizedek, because he lived in the time of Abraham. And modern day Jews, they have this foundation of their belief based on these stories from a Midrash. So I know for a fact that part of Midrash, which has nothing to do with the Quran, but is foundation of the Jewish rabbinical Judaism today. So therefore, I presume at least half of what I was reading so far, except that really crazy anachronism, and like they will probably believe in it. And Midrash is playing a big role with the Jews in their faith today. Any other?
Interesting.
So if you want, I can give you another short story, and I'm going to show you what the Jews today believe in from the Midrash. In the Genesis story, we have a story of Tamar and Judah, and it's actually an ugly story when Judah, it said it's walking by the road, and he see the woman who is Tamar. He doesn't know that's Tamar, who was his daughter-in-law. She's sitting there. So in the Torah it said he looked at her, look at the woman. He thought she was a prostitute. So he went to her and said, well, I'd like to have sex for money. And how much? That's in the Torah. If you read Midrash, you find the story quite different. It said when Judah passed by the Tamar, he never even looked at her. It took Tamar prayer to God saying, God, I want to be pregnant by this guy, by this pious man, do something. And according to the Midrash, God sent an angel of love who turned Judah and compelled him to come back and have sex with Tamar. That's I called whitewashing. And I read that story in the modern day website who give a credit to that story of Midrash, basically saying that's what we believe it happened exactly. So as we see Midrash, it's totally contradictory story and making the Judah actions looks good, because that's not his decision. It was not his decision to go to the prostitute. It was God who influenced him to go to the prostitute. That's the idea. And today, literally about maybe an hour ago, as I'm reading, I find this very interesting passage from the Midrash. It was another ugly story mentioned in one verse of the Genesis. When Reuben, being firstborn of Jacob, he went and slept with, had sex with concubine of his father Jacob. And his father knew it. That's all what it said, one verse. In the Midrash, I have to read it because I won't be able to explain it out. So just bear with me. Midrash, it said something like that. During Rachel's lifetime, her couch was always stood in the tent of Jacob. After her death, he ordered the couch of her handmaid Bilhah to be carried within. Reuben was thoroughly vexed, fret, and he said, not enough that Rachel alive curtained the rights of my mother, she must need give her annoyance also after death. He went and took the couch of his mother Leah and placed it in Jacob's tent instead of Bilhah's couch. Reuben's brother learned of his disrespectful act from Asher, and story goes on. You see what's happened? I thought the problem in Genesis 35, verse 22, let me read it again, but I just use Bible itself. And it came to pass that Israel dwelt in the land, and Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard it. So that's what Torah said. Midrash is not talking about sex between concubine Bilhah and Reuben. He's talking about the furniture removal from a tent. And it's considered to be, removing of the furniture is considered to be sin. Now, years later, I want to read you what Midrash said later on the pages before Jacob died. He has this kind of interesting revelation. Jacob, was particularly grateful for the revelation God has vouchsafed him concerning his firstborn son Reuben. Then he had repented of his trespass against his father by removing the furniture from his tent and putting another piece of furniture, according to the Midrash. Not sleeping and having sex with Bilhah. No, just removing piece of furniture. Now, he repented of removing furniture from and to against and called trespass against his father and atoned for it by penance. First time it was, according to the Midrash, the penance were done by Reuben first time. So he did something wrong by removing piece of furniture, and then he did something in order to pay. Let's say I don't remember exactly what the Midrash said, but he did something to cover up his sin of the furniture removal. And now very important, he was thus assured, Jacob was assured that all his sons were men worthy of being the progenitors of the 12th tribe. So here's what authors of Midrash did. They cannot change the story of the Torah, but they don't like it. It seems like a lot of people made a lot of patriarchs and prophets were involved in bad activities. Reuben had sleeping with his concubine of his father. Judah having sex unknowingly, but still having sex with his daughter-in-law, thinking she was just simple unknown prostitute. They look at it and say, you know what, we cannot change the Torah, but what we can do, we can write another book and we can explain it differently. So instead of Reuben and Bilhah's sex, they put furniture removal back and forth. Instead of Judas going and willingly going to have sex with a prostitute, it was God who turned his face to go to the prostitute. So they whitewash all the prophets, and I find more examples about that from Adam on to Solomon and David. And they explain every bad behavior by saying, no, it's not exactly what David did with the Bathsheba. No, it was somebody else's fault, not him, not his, because he's our king. So we cannot attribute bad stuff what's written in the Torah in the Old Testament about him. So they wrote Midrash and they attribute and they retold the stories differently. And that will bring an end the last argument the Muslims throw at me several times, including some of the dialogues online. You can still watch it and find how the Muslims saying, well, I believe the Torah was corrupted by the Jews in order to make story of the prophets and patriarchs look bad. So the Jews, wicked Jews, attributed sin to the prophets in order to justify their own sinful behavior. But the Quran is speaking about the prophet never sinned against God, only make minor mistakes. Well, problem happened here with this argument, and we could easily destroy it by simply bringing in the Midrash, who predates the Quran, but written well thousands or hundreds of thousands years later than the Torah. And still, since we have a Torah untouched, Midrash is made the great attempt to whitewash prophets and patriarchs to make them, as it said here, worthy of being the progenitors of the 12 tribes. So humans, Jews, decided to cover up sins of the patriarchs and make them look really nice and good. worthy to be progenitors of the 12 tribes, worthy. But they cannot change the Torah. They can change the meaning of the Torah written in different books next to the Torah. So what the Jews did in the time of Muhammad, they were reading the Midrash. What Jews do today, they're reading the Midrash and relying on its explanation. And what Muhammad heard, he heard the story from Midrash. And Midrash already made whitewashing for the stories of patriarchs and prophets. So therefore, in the Quran, we didn't find prophets and patriarchs making involved in big sins. No, actually, Quran is always bring the prophets in a very good light, contrary to the Torah, but very similar to the Midrash. So therefore, when the Muslim tell you, oh, the Torah been corrupted by the Jews in order to make prophet and patriarchs look bad, as the modern day Jews look bad, the Midrash is destroy the argument because it proves the point that the Jews, even before Muhammad, tried to make the patriarchs and prophets looks good to be worthy to be the progenitors of the 12 tribes of Israel. So therefore, Islam lost every single credible argument against the Torah. They could not say the Torah been corrupted because what was corrupted in the Torah, according to the Quran and Hadith and Tafsir, the name of Muhammad was removed from the Torah by the Jews in the time of Muhammad, which is 7th century AD. But we know that in the 1st century BC, since that time to today, Torah never been corrupted. In a storyline, we don't have a name of Muhammad. Every single story is different from the Quran of the patriarchs and prophets. And then they said, oh, it was removed. Well, it was name of Muhammad removed. So after Jews supposedly made Muhammad, they removed the name from the Torah, which is completely wrong argument. Can have no foundation because we do have archaeological discoveries. As I mentioned again and again, it predates Muhammad for 700 years. No name of Muhammad ever written there. Sorry, full stop. And the last argument, oh, Jews corrupted the Torah in order to attribute to the patriarchs and prophets their own sinful behavior. So the Torah is looking bad. So don't tell us that we're doing something bad because we're doing what David did with Bathsheba, what Judah did with Tamar, what Reuben did with Bilhah. That's logic behind Muslim claim. And therefore Jews are wicked to make the prophets look bad. Well, Midrash is giving complete opposite story. Jews were so wicked, they decided to whitewash the prophets and patriarchs. Written Midrash, and I'm pretty sure almost every Jew who belonged to rabbinical Judaism will believe in the story. Then it was Reuben, he never had a sex with Bilhah, but he removed a couch. That was his problem. That was his sin against his father. And that Judah never slept by his own will with the Tamar. It was God who sent whatever, like Cupid, angel Cupid with the arrows and make him turn back. That's how we see the Jews actually. Now I could say the Jews corrupted the Torah in Midrash. And the Quran is simply borrowed it because the Jews were talking to Muhammad and teaching him Midrash. And therefore, if Midrash is corruption of the Torah, that the Quran is like a broken telephone of Midrash. So it tells a story from Midrash, but it makes differences. And yet it's making itself further from the truth, which is the Torah. So that's basically, as we see how these three arguments of the Jewish Torah, the Midrash, and Islamic sources talking about corruption of the Torah by removing the name of Muhammad from the Torah, it's making all the claims of Islam is null and void. And therefore, basically, if you're going to use that argument, all the three arguments against any Jew, against any Muslim, you can expect them living Islam as you speak. Any other question?
Yeah, then Midrash is the some Jewish peoples, they want to make it like whitewash. They want to make all the characters looks good, okay? in their understanding that David did something very bad, and they cannot defend him. Even they are like shame of that, like talking about this incident happened there, and they are maybe like shame of it. They did something slightly different, and also about Reuben and than others. Like all characters made perfect.
Yeah.
They were perfect actors, as I understood, right?
Yes, exactly.
Then and the bad copy of Midrash is corrupt.
Yes, it is corrupted.
What you are saying.
So in that
Then,
case, remember Surah 279.
and very like it's not even matching totally, like but mostly matching Midrash copy, because like they didn't take like everything word by word,
No.
but the idea came from that book. And you said that it was like about end of first century, right? Between first century and fourth, 400, then 1200.
Yeah.
Midrash in that. Yeah.
Midrash was compiled.
And then
I think
it was slightly new in the time of Muhammad. Yeah. It was pretty new, like 200 years old. The time of Muhammad. Midrash was new idea, something new. And but you told that you said that you have even 400 and like even 500 years earlier copy you have by the discovering this Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yeah.
So it makes sense. We have a Torah, then we have people that didn't understand or didn't want to tell stories, and they wrote something and changing stories. They just flipped the story, and they wanted to show their prophet good, because it's our intention, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to hear that my prophet did something very bad, and also David, like talking about King David. I want to be proud of him.
Yeah.
But when I hear the stories, how discouraging it is, how in front of people like teaching about David, and even in our days, like when I open this, like we know why it happened. We know what the background of like sinfulness of man. No one's perfect, right? But all this stuff, as I understood from your talking, that they change it. They did something like good looking men. Then now I don't need to, like, shame on me, I'm like, my people is this way. I'm just having midrash. Then after 200 years, 300, like 3 centuries later, we have another man, and he is copying the midrash. And also, even like you gave example of one of the passage in Quran, it says that the people around him told him like, hey, this is like just Jewish legends, right? And what was the passage that, can you put again on the screen, like you did? It was
Exactly.
Jewish legend or thing.
Yeah, it's Legends of the Jews. I have 1 second. There is a book. You mean to show the book itself?
Yeah. It says that you don't need to show.
Legends
It is even the people around him.
Yeah.
They told him, hey, this is legend of.
I will give you in a second. I will put it on the screen so you can see it again. A second.
It proves that some people already telling him that they are not some people these days around him told him.
Yeah.
Right. It's
amazing to
anyway,
see.
it's very interesting. All this
Quran is explaining in its own words there is a real source of information for the Quran. Legends of the Jews, Midrash, is the real source of information. And I don't need to go around and try to figure out. All I need just to read these verses, understand it, find the proof, and here we have. We have legends of the Jews, which is former people, and they are, uh, these legends were told by Muhammad. Because everybody knows when you read the story of Solomon, with the humming, with the what's called bird, with the Queen Sheba. Everything is what we see, the ants, it's all midrash. And people generally, that's information, everybody knows it. But not many people know that midrash also embedded in in the story of Joseph, for example, or some of the story of Abraham and Noah. There's you find traces of midrash there as well. Story of Joseph had about I think it was 10 connections with the midrash or so, and I just show a few of them here, right, on our presentation. So when I see Surah 25, verse 5, legends of the former people which Muhammad has written down, and they, meaning former peoples, Jews, are dictated to him morning and afternoon. So people who said it against Muhammad, they said, we know these people who coming to you morning and afternoon, and they're Jews, and they're teaching you what? They're teaching you Midrash. And now the Muslim said, well, if that's allegations, baseless allegations, not really, because we have Midrash, and I just show you how they connect it with the Quran. And yet, these passages which connected to the Quran and Midrash, both books contradict the Torah. And that's important because we see how Midrash was written after the Torah was revealed, 1,000 years after some of them, because I'm reading it and I compile a lot of verses, not verses, but passages from Midrash, which could not be written before even Jesus, because they mentioned second temple destruction by Romans. It tells us, and this whole story mentioned in Genesis. We're still in the Genesis. And yet it's mentioned second temple destruction and mentioned Mordecai, it mentioned David and Solomon. So you know the people who wrote this Midrash were living in the day of Jesus or after Jesus, after temple was destroyed, second temple destroyed. So we know it's like 200-300 years before Muhammad was born. Then Midrash will start to get compiled and so on. And it could not be, let's say today Jews would said, oh, sources from Midrash came from the same source. When God gave written Torah to Moses, they also give this Midrash to him. Not really, because I find dozens, maybe 30, 40 so far, as I'm reading through the story of Midrash, right? I find about probably 30 or 40 already references, if no more, which I could easily prove that the Midrash was compiled 1,000 years later after the Torah was revealed to Moses. Okay, so that's a fact. And also we can find the fact how Midrash is telling story differently, making the very strange claims. For example, one of my favorite is on Simeon when he met Joseph in Egypt. Without knowing he's Joseph, Joseph said, I'm going to put you in jail, and other brothers will go back to Canaan to see Jacob. Simeon was so upset with it. So he screamed so hard, so strong, he gave such a big noise. Then 17 brave soldiers of Pharaoh who came to take him to the prison, 70, I don't know, because probably this guy was so big and mighty. They fell on the ground, according to Midrash. They lost their tooth and their heads went backwards. That was because Simeon yelled so hard. Okay, so that's one of the anachronisms out of many you can find in Midrash. So I don't think today any modern day Jew will say, well, I believe that's true story. I hope not. Otherwise, they're going to lose all faith in humanity if you'll say yes. but a lot of but it tells us midrash has source in human intellect at that time, 2,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago, and so on, right? So that's what will give us, and when you read it, compare the Torah and midrash, you see midrash is bunch of fairy tales, uh, like Superman flying, because I think Jacob in the midrash it said when he was fighting battle, he leaped so far, like he escaped his enemy and he disappeared from their sight. They couldn't see him. So that's Superman of our days. And everybody knows Superman never existed and Iron Man never existed. But yet they are in the Midrash in different ways. So you can see all the Marvel characters in the Midrash attributed to Simeon, to Judah, to Jacob, to Isaac, to Adam. In the Midrash, Adam was, I don't know how many, 10 meters high or something. And then after he sinned against God, his size reduced, so he was able to hide among the trees. That's a level of midrash. So it's fairy tales of the Jews, and maybe 2,000 years ago people believe in it, but not today. Well, it seems to be 1500s, 1400 years people believe in it. Muhammad believed in it, and he embedded some of the stories in the Quran. But of course, we don't know how much Jews taught to Muhammad. Well, we only see traces of their teaching embedded in the Quran. Therefore, we have now, I don't want to exaggerate anything. I just said, well, we find so many references in the Quran from Midrash, but there is almost no reference to the Torah. As a matter of fact, as I mentioned to you, in the story of Joseph, they have 174 differences from our Torah. And yet they have about 10 similarities with the Midrash in the stories of cutting hands, on when they peel oranges, or Jacob believed that Joseph was alive, and so on. The torn garment instead of just piece of garment in the hands. So all this stuff, we find it connecting Quran and Midrash. They're basically so close to each other compared to the Torah, which is totally different. That's why it's kind of studying all the ancient sources will open up our eyes to what in reality happens. So when we talk to Muslims about it, we could actually prove the point by using sources, not just giving our own opinions, but the actual sources from Jewish side, from Quran, and from the Torah, and see how three of them will agree or disagree with each other. So basic idea is Quran has no heavenly origin. It's been product of Muhammad's mind, who've been taught wrong stories by the Jews who quote them in Midrash, but not the Bible. That's the end of story. Any other questions?
I want to really know, for future, how much in our this let's say tasteful religious who really knows Torah in our, how much they trust or how much they lie to Midrash.
Well, I think
and if they say that we receive as a reference, if they say that we see as a reference, then what do they say about these differences between Torah and Midrash? And or keep it as a some book that doesn't hurt anyone. It's there. Or how do they see? Like if they see like a book, something written there, there's some good stuff there. Yeah, there are some fairy tales and things, but then read puts Quran in a very bad spot. Whether or not, like most ways, Quran is like there is no space for him there, and for the book
you know,
for the Quran.
even let's say
Let's say that like there
Jews,
is a
even the Jews say, well, we believe. Oh, I tell you one story. It's Abraham in the Midrash. Abraham has a very long story in the Midrash when he was with the king Nimrod, and he destroyed idols. And he said he kept one biggest idol. And when people ask him, like, why you destroyed all other idols? He said, I didn't destroy it. It's that big guy that destroyed everybody else. And they said, are you crazy? This guy cannot walk and talk, right? So that was his point in Midrash. So we find that exact story in the Quran. A little bit different, but the exact idea is destroying idols. Now, I was in a Zoom chat with Muslim and Jew, and Muslim asked a Jew, do you believe that story of destroying idols is true? And he said, absolutely. And yet this story is not in the Torah, it is in Midrash. But if you just look in that small part, it looks nice and smart and kind of put Abraham in a very good position. But if you read the entire story of Abraham in the Midrash, it's full of strange stuff, anachronisms. Like when he was 10 years old, he already walked and talked. When he was 20 days old, he was talking to Nimrod, and Nimrod was shocked to hear him speak like a baby. Infant is walking and talking. That's in the Midrash. So before he destroyed idols, he walked around talking about the one God. And when he was 10 days old, he started looking at the stars and saying, oh, he's my God. And then star disappeared. He said, no, I don't like this who disappeared. I look at the moon, it disappeared, so it's not God. Oh, sun is my God, and then it's set down, and oh, it's not my God. That's we see exactly what's Quran said. So Quran borrows that story from Midrash, but we look at the Midrash and give it a little bit bigger. So let's read not only this part, but the whole story. We'll find how anachronistic the story is. So, and yet today, our day Jews, he said, I believe that story of destroying idols is correct, yet it's not in the Torah. So then we can say, well, we can basically say, well, Judaism, if modern day Judaism, what they call rabbinical Judaism, based on the Midrash and the Talmud. Well, I cannot say anything about Talmud, it's a different subject, and I haven't studied that. But if it's the understanding of the Torah stories of the patriarchs from the Torah, based on Midrash, what I have and read and search in Midrash, based on that. So I think this Judaism is based on wrong like fake story, because same Midrash, it's not only giving extra information, which sounds crazy nowadays time, also contradict the Bible. Give you a last example, very short. When let me see, I think it was when Esau talked to Isaac about, well, Isaac talked to Esau, said, bring me food, prepare food for me, come to me and I'll bless you. His wife of Isaac heard in the Bible, it said she heard how they talk and she decided to trick Esau, and she prepared food, give it to Jacob, and let Jacob go in and pretend to be Esau. That's in the Torah. In the Midrash, it said she never heard the conversation, but it was given to her by Holy Spirit. So again, whitewashing. So it's not her fault. It was Holy Spirit from God who tells her story in the conversation and prompt her to make a switch from give a blessing in order to from Esau to Jacob. So that's Midrash. And it tells story completely, it's contradicting the Bible. Therefore, the Jews said, well, we believe in Torah, and they kiss Torah in the synagogue. I was sitting in the synagogue, and a big Torah scroll passed around, and everybody touches or kiss it. And yet, they believe in the stories of Midrash, which contradict the Torah. It doesn't make sense to me. So I could see the rabbinical Judaism is in trouble, but if they believe in Midrash And of course, Talmud, I heard some stories in Talmud equal as crazy, but a different subject, different level. And yeah, the Quran is also referring to the Midrash. So if Midrash is a fake news, and it is fake news clearly, the Quran is also fake news. So if we kick the Midrash out, the Quran is flying with it because it's connected. So that's how we could say, well, we could use one stone to kill two birds. That's what happened when we prove the Midrash to be unreliable, fake news source of information, and we still have our Torah standing firm and strong and depicting the true stories. But we need to know what exactly happens, and we don't need human source of information for that. And another thing is a reason for the Jews to write the Midrash and put next to the Torah scroll. It shows us that the Jews, they're never there to change the Torah. Otherwise, they will be easily embed few words here and there in the Torah from Midrash to make story looks good in the Torah scroll. But they didn't dare to do that. So they thought probably it's less of sin to make a tafsir explanation of the Torah in a different book, like a tafsir is not the Quran, but explanation of the Quran. So similar to the story, to that analogy, is Midrash is tafsir to the Torah. And here, if it's contradict the Torah, it's okay because you have extra information, more reliable. Of course, that's also like big sin from the behalf what these Jews did in order to who created Midrash. But nevertheless, they didn't dare to change Torah, and therefore, existence of Midrash and what's written there, it's by itself, it's undeniable proof that the Torah scroll has never been changed by the Jews because they didn't like what is written there, and we know they don't like it. They wrote the Midrash and put next to it and studied Torah through the eyes of Midrash. That's how much they can go, but they dare not to venture and changing the Torah scroll itself. That's why we have access to the true stories. We see the faults and sins of patriarchs and Reuben and Judah and Jacob, and we see that Rebecca, and we see that, and we know the story real because how I said once, the Torah is most anti-Semitic book because no Jew will write in clear mind story against your own self, against your own patriarchs and prophets. But yet they wrote a Midrash and whitewashed it.
This is, very good point. When I read about Abraham, he's a liar, right? He's like, then I read about, and also when I most like innocent character, Joseph. But Joseph's act is like provoking his brothers, right?
Yeah.
So is it good or bad? When I read about Joseph, his attitude is like kind of, I can say that it's kind of arrogant, like saying to his dad and his brothers, like, he should, in a way, you should be sensitive of that, right? Even though you have like, where is this humility? Where is this, humble spirit? And also other Reuben and Judas, all these people, like, you need to do something.
Yeah.
I understand this people that came idea with writing Rush. Actually, it is very understandable, right? Then,
it's very human.
but yet the Torah is there. Yeah.
That's why
the Torah is there. Torah is
has no human origin, because otherwise, it's tendency of the Jews to make story looks better. But the way the Torah was given to us, it's hard truth. It's bad stories there, but they're still there, and we have to learn lesson because God never said, "Oh, whatever Reuben did, it was good. Whatever Judah did, it was good. Whatever other characters were doing, it was good." No, He condemned them because we know how we should not behave. Okay, so that's what we know. That's the Torah standalone book. But the Quran, Midrash, and who knows what else. It's whitewashing stories. It tried to make everything look nice and fluffy and white. And so they are human in origin, and we could see, because as I said, no Jewish will say our fathers, our patriarchs were bad. No, they're good because, and we are also good because we are on the foundation of them. So that's kind of lineage. And as a matter of fact, very last one. Uh, in the Midrash, it said that the reason for God to create the world, one reason, it's meant Jacob. For the sake of Jacob, God created everything. I mean, like, really? We don't find that stuff in the Torah. Yet it is in the Midrash several times in different stories and mentioned about Jacob. And that was even Torah was revealed, created before, and Torah talking to God as if a living person about some situations with Adam. Torah is talking to God in heaven. It sounds like the Quran is written in heaven. So that's the idea that Torah was also written in heaven and kept there. So I have the same idea. So it's all human origin, human understanding, and making it everything look nice. But the Torah, original one, it stays tells the truth as it is, not whitewashing, everything clear, and we can learn from it way more than we could learn from Midrash. So that's basic story, what I derive from that.
Just something your your thought about the Torah being most anti-Semitic book on the earth. Remember, God told said Moses, I will just destroy all these people. Like in a way that's like very heavy language says that it's filthy people.
Yeah.
And I will make you new nation. So how to explain this? Like, just like Moses did, and Moses said to God, if you will destroy all this Israel, what other nations heard of your glory, heard of your fame? What they will say then? They will say to you that, like, this God is not like peaceful God, because God destroyed his own people. This is Moses' argument. But we see that trouble people all the time, like, they turn God. Then in some places, like the nation of Israel described as a prostitute, right? And this is in the Torah, in the book, all this book, that we can see clearly that, I can say that, the most anti-Semitic book on the. But the solution is what? In the 4th century, writing something else. Here is a midrash. All these people, actually good people, actually, he didn't sleep with his daughter. No way. It's something else happened. There was an error or something. Reuben didn't sleep with his stepmother. No way. Tried something else. Or David, how come King David can do it? Like something else happened, change it. Or it is funny, very funny for me that this special events incident changing to only move the furniture. I mean, it is like it is something, just write something else. What do you mean that Israel was so angry? His father was angry because of he changed some furnitures.
Couch.
It's very interesting.
And you know what? The Midrash is basically what do you call it? It's acting as a lawyer. You have bad case, you don't like it, so you hire a lawyer who make the case look good. So maybe that's why many Jews among the Jews, many are lawyers, good lawyers. If they manage to do midrash and make it like really nice and looking good, when we use the Torah and explain it the way so it's as I said, it's whitewashing. So it's interesting how to why people are doing it. I don't know. Maybe some Christians also in the explanation of the Old and New Testament they tend to do something like that. Have you heard of anybody doing similar stuff?
Yeah, you mean the similar that like in whitewashing, but the changing? Yeah, I could say that a lawyer,
Yeah.
you know, if I would be a lawyer, okay, I know that someone is guilty, right?
Yeah.
I will not say in the court that this man is guilty. I will do something.
Yeah.
You know, they try to lawyer of the Torah, but from wrong viewpoint.
Yeah.
Torah doesn't mean lawyer. Torah has a message, and this message not someone else will come as a prophet. Like this message is thing different, and it is if you will look at message, not only stories are different than Quran, but I guess his message is totally different.
Mm-hmm.
The idea is totally different. One book is saying that the man is filthy, sinner, needs a savior, needs clean. You know that this one book clearly says that man needs help. Another book says that some of them are okay, some of them are holy,
Yeah.
some of them are admirable.
Yeah.
You know, then this is different. I think that if uh, now I think I'm looking different eyes out all these stories. Now I see that man is exalting himself. You know, because if I say that David is bad, okay, David did something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Now I am showing this here in this book that David is bad. Now as a leader, let's say after 4 centuries, okay, I came and I am Jew, and now I will say that I am your leader now,
Mm-hmm.
and our forefathers are dead, and I look at my soldier, I will say, my soldier, go to war. You know what the soldier will say? You know, I trust you. Why? Because our forefather did. You know, how you will do that? Then the soldier will ask him, what to do?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and they will say that you should go before us, with us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then the soldier will say that, yeah, I know the story, they did wrong thing. Then, as our forefathers did something wrong, we should repeat the same way. Come with us, a king, dear.
Mm-hmm.
And also, we read that one man is cursing David,
Yeah.
and his friend said, his soldiers, like he said, what is this dead dog talking? Let's kill him. And David said, if God let him talk, let me see my mistake. He is humble like living and stuff. But now, my point is this: if after 6 centuries, as a leader, how I will exalt myself in front of my people, because I want to show them myself as a person. I am the man, follow me. But in the Torah, heart of Torah says, don't follow men, follow God, right?
That's true.
So this is shifting the stuff from following instead of following. God, they made a following man. Look at David, look at Solomon, look at Reuben, look at each one of them, how great they are. And then this shifting is actually very dangerous. It takes you to the place that then it creates all in our side, our part of the world, like Middle East, that, but there are great teachers like that. Even some people pray by their name. For example, I heard many say, God, forgive me for the sake of this man, so and so. Have you ever heard kind of like people praying? Like people go to people's cemeteries.
Yeah.
And because in their understanding, that man was perfect.
Yeah.
Even though like they didn't profit thing. That's just simple, but because this exaltation, self,
Yeah.
then even the person is died, they go to their cemetery and say that God forgive me by name of this man. If we would not, if we would understand Torah, if we would not be deceived by Midrash or the bad copy of Midrash, we would see that clearly that hey, man needs a savior. Man is helpless. Only God can. And one thing that doesn't matter, prophet, king, whoever is, all the men are same. All of them same. All of them need help. And if someone asking someone follow me, I will say to them that hey, I am like I will fail. I am myself, but because it takes tons of humility. If I will say to someone, I am just human being. I don't know. So don't trust God. But it takes a lot. Which leader nowadays which say, which imam, even which pastor, like whatever said, hey guys, I am sin. So what people will say, like, but we just change it to this way that I know some prayer that it helps me. I'm different than I am like that. In order to say it, I should deal with Torah. How to deal with Torah? Write something else. So if I did something in days, it happens many times, by the way. Like the internet in days, like in many countries, it happens this. Some religious leader does something, for example, like abusing and something sexual moralities, and they tell God told you that. They are just defending themselves, and many of the followers they believe to him. It's like if I would know the heart of the true meaning of, I would say that this man is just failure, like all of us. But his followers, he's like in a way these people that deceived. They said no, he's just God lead him do this way. It is the part of plan, thing like that. Anyway, it's great sense. It's all this. But in the end of all these things, you can clearly see men try to exalt himself. Men said try to lift him, himself, and said, "Yeah, I'm the man. I'm the. I am better than you." Actually, not.
Yeah. Okay. So
Yeah, it's beautiful information. Thank you.
yeah, thank you. So we'll have another uh, Zoom next time. We'll find a topic to talk.
Let's continue talking.
Sure.
More things should be built, right?
Yeah. Okay. So
Okay.
bye. I'm gonna stop recording now.